Okay, it doesn't. Okay, done. So, hello everyone. My name is Barry Keane of Warsaw University. I'd like you to introduce my co-host, Ola Ragosko, who's a student of English Studies, and she's writing her master's. And we're both really delighted to welcome Andrew Hughes today, who wrote this wonderful, wonderful book, The Coroner's Daughter. Can you see it here? Oh yes, here, The Coroner's Daughter. I think it's a literary tour de force, and it really is a great page turner as well. And I'd first of all, before we begin, I think we're going to have a few words from Dominic Berkeley of the Irish Embassy. And just before you speak, Dominic, I'd just like to thank you for all the Embassy's support of all initiatives that Warsaw University takes. I think we have had a great relationship over the years, and long may it continue. So.
Thanks a million, Barry, and thanks for that introduction. Hello, everybody. Good evening. Dominic from the Irish Embassy here. It's fantastic to see you all online and so much interest in this evening's event. First of all, I'd like to pass on the ambassador's apologies. He was called away to a rather urgent meeting this evening, so unfortunately can't join us, but he's asked me to say a few words in his absence. First of all, I'd like to welcome Andrew Hughes, our chosen author for the One Dublin One Book project this year. It's great to see you online, Andrew, and thanks a million for taking the time to join us. I can imagine it's been a busy month of events and various promotional bits and pieces. This is our fourth year in a row joining the One Dublin One Book initiative. So we're delighted to be part of it again. A huge thanks to Professor Barry Keane and his colleagues at the Warsaw University for kind of leading our event this evening. Very much looking forward to the discussion. And also a big thanks to Jackie Lynham and the whole team at Dublin City Libraries. They've been great support to us over the last number of years in terms of our participation in the project as well. So thanks to you. So I believe I'm welcoming members from up to 10 book clubs from right across Poland this evening. So welcome to each and every one of you. So I think it's the highest number we've had actually in the last number of years. So we have members from clubs joining us from Warsaw, from Poznan, from Krakow, as well as places like Szamotue, Kędzierzyn-Koźle, and Piaseczno as well. I hope I haven't left anybody out, but hopefully I got most of them. So just a quick word in terms of Irish literature generally in Poland, because it's been a busy but very exciting couple of years actually in that respect, not only in terms of contemporary literature, but also classical as well. So in late 2021, we had a new Polish translation of Ulysses, for example, which coincided with the centenary of the publication of Ulysses last year. So lots of events and everything around that, which was great. We then last year, the largest literary festival in Poland, Literacki Sopot, had a sort of an Ireland edition focusing on Irish writing. And we welcomed 13 Irish writers and commentators to Poland actually for that festival. So it was great to see so many people over, and many of them have been translated into Polish as well, which is fantastic to see. Then we're looking forward this year to welcoming our first resident to Krakow as part of the new Hini Miłosz residency that we've kind of established with partners in Krakow. So we have Irish poet Alice Lyons coming for that to spend some time in the former apartment of Czesław Miłosz, the Polish great Nobel laureate, who was good friends with obviously Ireland's Seamus Heaney, another Nobel laureate. So it's a great project, and we're looking forward to that later this year as well. And just lastly, we're just back last week from Gdansk, where we saw the first sort of production in Polish of Brian Friel's translations as well as part of the Founded Translation Festival. So there's an awful lot going on in terms of Irish literature here in Poland, and it's fantastic to see a lot of important sort of milestones being hit as well. And we've really found here in Poland that I suppose Irish literature is a real kind of, it opens doors for many people here in Poland, many Polish readers who might not have been to Ireland, might have heard bits about Ireland, but actually it's through the literature that they really discover the country, and no more so than the One Dublin One Book project, obviously focusing on our capital city, even if Dublin in 1816 is a little bit different maybe than the Dublin we know and love today, but nevertheless. So just a final word to say that the Coroner's Daughter, it's a fantastic book. Congratulations again, Andrew. It's really, yeah, as Barry said, it is a page turner. It's lots of edge of the seat moments in it. I'm really looking forward to the discussion and hearing your insights on it. So I'll leave it there. I'll hand back to Barry and the team there. But just thanks a million for taking part, and wish you all a great discussion this evening. Thanks a lot.
Wonderful, Dominic. Thank you so much. And we'll be having a few words from Jackie at the end of the of everything after all the questions. And Jackie will hopefully maybe say a few words about the One Dublin One Book initiative, maybe at the end of the meeting. So now I'll hand you over to Ola, who's going to introduce Andrew.
Yes, hello everyone. So I would like to introduce our speaker today, Mr. Andrew Hughes, and he is the author of The Coroner's Daughter. And although born in County Wexford, Andrew is deeply bonded with the city of Dublin. He graduated from Trinity College with a BA in English and History. And before he started working as a freelance author, he worked for RTE, which is the public broadcaster of the Republic of Ireland. His experience as an archivist has inspired him to write his debut novel, The Convictions of John Delahunt, which was shortlisted for CWA Endeavour Historical Dagger in 2013. The plot of the book, of The Coroner's Daughter, tells the story of Abigail Lawless, who is a young girl, and her attempts to discover the truth behind harrowing events and murders which are happening throughout the city of Dublin and during the year without a summer. While reading, we are kindly invited to stroll through the streets of Dublin among Abigail's sight and to gradually discover the dreadful truth ourselves. Andrew, I would like to take this opportunity and to be the very first of, I'm sure, many people to ask you a question today. Since your work as an archivist has inspired you to write The Convictions of John Delahunt, is it possible that the process of such an experience guided you through finding an idea behind The Coroner's Daughter as well?
Well, yes, the short answer is yes. First of all, can I thank everybody for those lovely introductions and thank everybody for hosting us today. It's wonderful to represent Dublin and One Dublin One Book. I'm delighted to be here. Yes, my experience as an archivist absolutely inspired my writing. Particularly my first novel that you mentioned, Convictions of John Delahunt, based on a true life Victorian murderer, Dublin Castle informer in the 1840s. That story I found through my research into Georgian houses in Dublin. I came upon this particular case. It was called The Murder of the Italian Boy, just a case that I stumbled upon while going through 1840s newspapers. And so by being immersed in those newspaper archives and in other archives, I was able to tell John Delahunt's story directly by researching primary sources, but really researching through newspaper archives and other online records that are now available because the libraries of the world are being scanned and made available. Then when it came to writing The Coroner's Daughter, I wanted to set the book in 1816 because it was the year without a summer. And therefore I needed to research what forensics was like in 1816 to find out what was possible through forensic science, to look at certain cases from coroner's inquests around that time, just to see how the coroner's court worked, what the work of the coroner was. And again, my access to that, or my way into that, was by using newspaper archives. It's a huge part of my research, both in my work, both in my career as an archivist and when I write. Just because I'm sure students in Poland, it's just the same. All the editions of major newspapers going back hundreds of years are available just to read and to search. And just by searching for certain words and terms, you can find these obscure cases, and you can always find inspiration for your.
You're after disappointing me a bit, Andrew, because I pictured you with a magnifying glass in the basement of the Library of Ireland, you sifting through the newspapers, you know, getting lots of dust on your fingers, and so it's mostly a digitized search, was it?
Well, you see, I'm old enough that I lived through that process.
Okay.
And let me tell you, it's much easier by doing it online, when it's almost like a Google search. You just put in what you need. And yeah, so I've been from the actual going through the newspapers themselves, these giant broadsheets that are bound in huge ledgers and going through page by page.
That's the way I pictured you. That's the way I pictured you writing this thing.
It happened once, you know, a quarter century ago. But that is a slow and laborious process. And then I moved to the microfilm and the microfiche in the National Library, where you load them up into the viewer and, you know, twirl your way through them. Again, a slow process. So it's just that the newspaper archives has just made it all so much quicker, and it's a fantastic tool. It's not only is it for research, but the stories that you just come across by looking at these coroner's inquests just provide inspiration because of the cases themselves, the language that was used. The coroner's inquest would often include testimony from people, the poorest people in Dublin, who otherwise just would have gone unrecorded. It's just a fluke that they were witness to some crime, and the coroner asked the men to give testimony at an inquest, and because of that, their voices have been recorded. So there's just such a wealth of information in these archives, and my background as an archivist has definitely helped me, because I know where to look, I know where the information is, and then hopefully I know how to use it as well.
Okay, great. Well, Andrew.
Yes, but we just have to tell everyone about the surprise that May will be coming, because we've lots of questions, but there's also a surprise that you may or may not know about, Andrew. So Ola, would you just, because we have someone to the left of us that we feel we must introduce a little bit in advance, right? So.
Okay, so we have with us here today a student of our English Institute, Barbara Podstawczyńska. Basia is involved in many different projects in our university. She is one of the editors of students magazine Anything Goes, and she's also a member of our theatrical group, Cheerful Hamlets.
So say hello, Bob.
Hello.
So Basia will be reading an extract towards the year. Yeah, Ola's in charge of the agenda. Yes. So I think we'll go to can I just ask one question? Sorry, I know you're, yeah, okay, sorry. Can you explain, because I don't think everyone knows about this summer. Was it this summer without summer, or summer without any? The year without a summer, exactly.
That's right. You know, in 1815, Mount Tambora in Indonesia erupted. It was the largest volcanic eruption in recorded history, and it sent this huge dust cloud over North America and Western Europe, and it caused these huge catastrophic effects for agriculture. This dry dust just hung in the atmosphere for months and months. It turned the sun blood red. And I'd come across that story a while ago and just kind of set it aside. But when I wanted to write The Coroner's Daughter, I had to pick a year in which to set it. I said, why not set it in 1816, this year without a summer? It immediately gave this lovely Gothic, eerie atmosphere in which Abigail could operate.
And we haven't had a summer since.
I know, yeah. I've been saying that over here, you know, and all the Dubliners keep telling me, sure, every year in Ireland is the year without a summer, but, you know, we get used to it.
But that was an unusual year without a summer, okay.
That
was a Gothic non-summer year, okay. Okay, so.
Yes, we have a bunch of students who would like to speak to you today, Andrew, and to ask you a questions. And the first student to do so is Magdalena Sikora. Magda, could you try to unmute yourself?
Yeah, I think it's working.
Yeah, it's working. Great.
And maybe turn up the volume, Magda, and off you go.
Okay, so is it better now?
Yes,
perfect.
It's great.
Okay. So Andrew, thank you for taking the time to come and talk to us here. So I just have a really short 3 questions about the Brethren, and so the first question is kind of a follow-up to Ola's question, because what sort of research did you do to learn about the Brethren? Because as Ola mentioned, you are a qualified archivist. So did you look up some old documents or texts to find out more about their, teachings, their leaders, and how such a religious movement was organized and worked?
Yes. Before I wrote fiction books, before my first novel, Convictions of John Delahunt, my first book that I ever wrote was a social history of Fitzwilliam Square in Dublin. It's this square of Georgian houses. So I wrote a history of this particular square and all the people who lived in these Georgian houses. And it just so happened that in the 1820s, this movement was founded in one of the houses in Fitzwilliam Square, and they were the Brethren. Their leader was a man called Mr. Darby. So the Brethren in my novel are very closely based, not exactly based, but very closely based on this real life 1820s group called the Brethren, led by this magnetic, charismatic figure, Mr. Darby. When the congregation moved to Britain, their first meetings took place in Plymouth, and from then on they were called the Plymouth Brethren, and the Plymouth Brethren is still a group that exists today. But I just plucked the Brethren, the real life Brethren from 1820s, put them in 1816 and used them as the antagonists for Abigail. And so it was my research into that particular book and this particular square, Fitzwilliam Square, where I learned all about the Brethren. And again, it was, I think, mostly newspaper archives and online libraries. The fact that the libraries of the world are scanned and available through sites like archive.org and things like that. Just the earliest documents of this congregation, their earliest textbooks, the memoirs of the congregation were just available. So I was just able to read about them and how they operated, how they dressed, their kind of very conservative and austere beliefs. So I used them as the antagonists for Abigail.
He was quite an austere fellow, the real Darby, yes, I think.
Yeah, I think
controversial.
He's definitely a controversial figure. There's a translation of the Bible called the Darby translation. So he was a well-known figure in the 19th century. But he lived in a house in Fitzwilliam Square, number 5 Fitzwilliam Square, which was owned by a man called Judge Pennyfather, Edward Pennyfather. And Mr. Darby was Pennyfather's spiritual advisor. And so I used number 5 Fitzwilliam Square as the home for Judge Gould. So I directly just used that inspiration of Pennyfather, made him into Judge Gould, and had Mr. Darby as the spiritual leader of this group. It's also the case that in the early 20th century in Ireland, there was this kind of burgeoning evangelical movement, a kind of a reaction to radical politics in Europe, but also a reaction to the push for Catholic emancipation in Ireland. Catholics in Ireland were still suffering from the penal laws of Great Britain and Ireland. So there was a push towards Catholic emancipation. And at the same time, perhaps because of that, these evangelical movements were springing up in Ireland and Dublin. And later it was called the Second Reformation. So it was kind of based in the historical period as well.
Yeah, because you do depict them proselytizing. And there's a very kind of a disturbing scene in House, yes, with starving Catholics on the beach, and they're proselytizing and they're baptizing them. You know, I was wondering, you write about justice, where I don't think the Catholics were getting the same kind of justice in those courts as, shall we say, what did you come across anything of that?
Absolutely. I mean, Edward Pennyfather, the man I mentioned in number 5 Fitzwilliam Square, presided over the trial of Daniel O'Connell in 1844. O'Connell was a great Catholic leader in Ireland, that the force behind Catholic emancipation in 1827. He was tried in 1844. His jury was made up entirely of Protestants, and a writer at the time said, imagine a jury chosen from Dublin and there wasn't a single Catholic. That just seems an anomaly. So it was the case that yes, there was prejudice against Catholics in Ireland at the time, and the push for emancipation just caused this reactionary growth of evangelical groups, but mostly Protestant based.
Yeah, we can come back to that. So has Magda got anything else to add?
Yeah, Magda, do you have anything else you would like to say?
I have 2 questions more, but maybe there's no time. So.
No, absolutely, go ahead.
Okay, so as for my second question, so the theme that I found particularly interesting in the book is the juxtaposition of religion and science. And, while reading the book, an ever-recurring question arises whether or not religion and science can peacefully coexist. And so my question is, why did you decide to include such a theme in your book?
Good question.
Yeah. So, as I said, while there was this evangelical awakening in Ireland, Europe was coming out of the Age of Enlightenment. And so I wanted to show students of that enlightenment in Dublin through Mr. Lawless and Professor Reeves, Ewan and Abigail, in juxtaposition, as you said, to this reactionary, more conservative religious fervor. It just seemed like a nice tinderbox atmosphere in Dublin where crimes and skullduggery could happen. So it was definitely a huge theme that I wanted to explore, mostly because, and this is the case for a lot of historical fiction, these kind of themes just keep coming up in our societies again and again. There is a constant battle between certain ideas, and they tend to, in this particular case, religion versus science is an ongoing debate that everybody has. So you can always, just look to Dawkins versus some, English bishop would be having a similar debate than what Reeves and Darby might have had 200 years ago. So it's a case, it's something that you can do with historical fiction, is just comment on trends and things that are happening in your own society, in your own time, but perhaps they are more stark in bygone eras.
Yeah, I loved the way you presented the College of Surgeons as this crucible of vociferous debate. Of course, reason didn't always win out in some of these arguments by...
No, absolutely. But it's just something as well that Abigail was obviously drawn more towards the rationalist scientific side. And so it was just a kind of a play on her own prejudices as well, perhaps, even though she was probably right most of the time, but was her own beliefs blinding her to certain things and perhaps making her more prejudiced against other people as well.
Wonderful. I think, and so Magda, would you like to?
I do.
Pretty good questions, don't you think, Andrew?
Excellent questions so far.
No, I just have like one more question. So I was thinking whether or not the character of Professor Reeves is maybe, and his conflict with the Brethren was maybe inspired by none other than Charles Darwin and his struggle with the church, because, both were men of science, and because of their opinions and work, they were criticized, especially by men of faith. So, so what about that?
Yeah, I don't think I was thinking specifically of Darwin, but as I say, these things are cyclical and kind of ongoing. So Darwin versus the church is a great example of a more Victorian era example of this, what we're talking about. Dawkins in more recent time is a more recent example. So I don't think I had a specific person in mind as to who Reeves might represent. He just represented the rationalist scientific mindset that perhaps could just be as zealous as the religious people that he was against.
Wonderful.
Great.
Okay, thank you so much. That's all from me.
Thank you.
Okay, so the other student is Dorota Mrugalska. Dorota,
Yes.
are you
Can
here?
you hear me?
Great, yeah, perfect.
Great. So yes, my name is Dorota, and I have a question about the relationship between Abigail and Ewan, because there is one moment which is particularly intriguing for me. And this is the moment in the story when Abigail recalls a case of the coroner's niece and a stable boy, right?
Yes.
And yes, and she recalls that while looking at Ewan. And I am just wondering if there is something underlying in this moment, an underlying meaning. Maybe something that stirs Abigail about this relationship, or maybe there's something forbidden about it.
I like the fact that you used the word could she have been scared of the relationship? I think that's interesting in itself, in that she is worried about her own reputation, and she knows that she can't just begin a relationship without going through the certain etiquette of the time. But it's also kind of fascinating in that when I was writing the book at first, I wasn't completely sure that Ewan was going to be a completely unsinister character. Because when you're writing the book, you're kind of keeping all possibilities open in your head about who could be the heroes, who could be the villains, who might turn out to be behind, the brains behind it all along. So when I was writing the book first, there were scenes that I wrote where Ewan was in fact more sinister than he turned out to be. Just little moments where Abigail happens to meet him in a corridor, and there's, it's dark and it's quiet, and she just has a moment and he's looking at her and she doesn't know how to react. So I wonder, perhaps after that I said, no, Ewan is definitely one of her allies. He's definitely a good guy. But I wonder, subconsciously, did I leave that scene in where when she sees him walk along the grass, leaving footprints in the dewdrops. And then she immediately thinks of this sinister case in which two lovers were in a house, murdered the owner of the house. And the fact that when the police arrived, they saw perfectly intact carpet of dewdrops, which meant that the killers were still inside the house. It couldn't have been the case that somebody came in and murdered the owner of the house. The murderers were already inside the house. Could it be that in that moment she remembered that case just because of a kind of a throwback to my ideas at the beginning that perhaps Ewan was not all that he seemed? So if that's the case, it was subconscious, and it's fantastic that you picked up on it.
Well, I just
Yeah.
have to add about Dorota. When I was asked to do the book club, the first people I spoke to her group was my MA seminar group, and we were just wondering what numbers there would be for interest in the book. But of course, everyone who picked up the book absolutely loved it, and as you see, there's been a huge response to your book in Poland. Dorota was one of the earliest people who emailed me saying, "I have to be at the book at this meeting with the author." So Dorota was bowled over by the book. So I really have to say that.
Well, I'm delighted by that. Thanks very much, Dorota, and thanks for the question.
Okay.
Thank
So,
you.
Next.
Yep. Yeah, thank you very much, Andrew. And now Paulina, our other student, would like to ask you a question.
Hello. So thank you once again for this opportunity. I was particularly intrigued by the relationship between Abigail and her mother, and this general portrait of her as this ghost-like figure, both in her daughter's life and in the house in general. And I think that this picture of mental illness among women in the 19th century, it goes very well with the unreliable narration that the reader gets, because we only get to meet Mrs. Lawless through her daughter's point of view. So obviously a lot is left unsaid. So I just wanted to ask you to say something more about this depiction of Abigail's mother and of the relationship. So what were your motivations for that?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think at the start there was a simple plot-driven motivation that perhaps you see in a lot of this type of story, whereby removing a parent helps establish a character just by giving him or her obstacles to overcome early in life. You see it in Harry Potter, you see it in the Enola Holmes movies that just came out. A parent figure is missing, and that affects our main character in some way. I think then it was more a case of what could I do with that to really establish Abigail's character, and then it was a case of allowing a closer relationship with her father, and the fact that she was an only child, the fact that Mr. Lawless was indulgent of her, interests and her pursuit of knowledge and forensics and so on. That seemed to me it would be more plausible and easier if the mother figure in Abigail's life was absent, and the easiest way to have her absent was just to have been passed away. So there was that aspect as well. And then, as you say, there was just the opportunity to delve into the backstory of Mrs. Lawless and her illness and what happened to her, and then have that as a plot point, as something that the brethren could hold over Mr. Lawless, and the brethren could use to perhaps get him to return a verdict that he didn't believe in, which might have been the case with Emily Casey, and just as a threat to hold over him. The fact that one of the brethren members knew the fact that Mrs. Lawless had killed herself, that was covered up in an inquest and not revealed, and it might look bad for Mr. Lawless if that all came out. So it was a pressure point to use on Mr. Lawless himself. But you're right, it was interesting to explore just mental illness and the attitudes to mental illness in the 19th century, and how it would have been talked about and how it would have been described, and the prejudice that would have been against it that hopefully today we wouldn't countenance. So it was a question of what was Mrs. Lawless suffering from, whether it was some kind of anxiety disorder or depression or certain types of phobias, but whatever it was undiagnosed, and she suffered because of it. And really, even Mr. Lawless couldn't explain it. This rationalist man, scientist of the early 19th century, couldn't understand why his wife was like this. And Abigail couldn't explain it. All she could remember from her childhood was this mother figure that she obviously loved. In the few memories that we have, they're quite poignant and sweet, but very quickly her mother drifts away from her. And Abigail can't explain it, and perhaps she feels a slight bitterness towards it. And it's only then when she learns the truth, the shocking truth, that's shocked because it's revealed by the brethren in this kind of poison newspaper article. Abigail has to reassess her own relationship with her mother and her own knowledge of what happened, and very quickly come to terms with that and understand it. Which I think she does in a way. She very quickly realizes that her petty disappointments with her mother for not being able to leave the house or attend the ball or do the things that Clarissa and her mother were able to do was absolutely petty in comparison to what her mother must have been suffering. Mm-hmm. So all those things were in my head when I was deciding what to do with Abigail's mother, from simple plot decision of it would be easier for the mother figure to be present, to be absent, just to kind of push her more towards her father, and to create that relationship with her father, and then also just the interest in exploring exactly what happened with Mrs. Lawless.
Yeah, I found myself pausing on that episode. I think Ireland has I think the way you reflect those intimate moments, though, you're also saying quite a lot about how Ireland reflects with difficulty on its own collective memory, yeah?
Yeah, that's absolutely the case.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it might be the case as well that comes up with how Emily Casey is treated for being an unmarried mother, and how her child is disregarded, the pressures on a young woman because of giving birth out of wedlock and the terrible outcomes that can result from that, which in Ireland was happening very, very recently. And then, yes, and the treatment of Mrs. Lawless just because of the misunderstanding of her condition. And then, but more broadly, the treatment of women in general, and Abigail in particular, being of a, hugely talented young woman, just not having the opportunity to express that talent or explore it, or for her to pursue her passions and her interests, except in the limited way that her father, well, it's quite a generous way, but still limited, in how her father allows her to learn from his textbooks and teach her certain of his techniques. But still, Abigail is very frustrated by the fact that she won't be able to go to college, she won't be able to pursue these things as a career. And so, yes, so from Emily Casey to Mrs. Lawless to Abigail herself, to Clarissa, to Edith Gould, just the oppression of women. And again, it's something historical fiction can comment on, things that are happening today, just because you can point to an era when it's much more stark and obvious, but it's always easy to draw parallels to what's going on at the moment.
Always, yeah, absolutely. I just want to make some practical announcement. If anyone wants to ask a question, please put it in the chat, and we'd love to hear from you all. Because fantastic. And we'll just try and insert them in. Can we ask this question? Although maybe you read out that question there, yeah. So we've had one question here, very interesting, a very long one. Oh, keep them short.
Have you discovered anything new or surprising or freshly insightful about your own novel after this full month of answering the questions of your readers?
Good question.
Or were you already so steeped in your characters and the world you placed them in that you knew them and their world so deeply and intimately that you were ready for any question?
Well, that can be a yes or no answer.
That's
no,
really joking. I forgot what the start of the question was. No, I do.
Good question.
Yeah, one of the best things about this whole month has been engaging with readers. So a lot of the events have been kind of book clubs in branch libraries, suburban libraries throughout Dublin. And there's a lot of interesting questions that get asked. One woman in the very first one said that perhaps Abigail was a lonely figure. And I hadn't considered that at the time. because I thought she was in this quite cozy world with her father, with Mrs. Perrin and Jimmy. She has her friend Clarissa. And so that's not something I would have considered. But then when she said it, when she asked that question, it did strike me that perhaps she's lonely, in that it's a very small world. It can be changed very quickly, as if Clarissa found a husband and was taken away to some place to live, Abigail would just lose that outlet completely. So yes, there are things like that that have thrown me. But I think perhaps in general, I know the novel well.
Well, we've asked you the most interesting questions today, so absolutely. So yes.
Yes, and we have Magda, who would also like to ask you a question.
Magda Chmielewska, yes?
Yes.
Hello, Magda.
Hello. First of all, thank you, Andrew, for writing this wonderful novel and for meeting with us today. And I want to ask a question as a person who also feels connected to my hometown and the city where I went to school, about your research. And when you wanted to faithfully represent 19th century Dublin, was the research a tedious, tiring process for you? Did you feel any pressure to properly present the city that you already knew so well? Or was it more of a formality and a rather pleasant and rewarding task?
Right. I think the research really came out of this book that I mentioned earlier on, my history of Fitzwilliam Square. And back then, so I wrote that book like in 2010. And so I was researching 69 individual houses in Fitzwilliam Square. And I didn't know it then because I had no intention of ever writing fiction. But all that research was providing me with this fantastic setting and this brilliant cast of characters for historical fiction. That later on, when I started writing historical fiction, I could, I had the inspiration from the houses. I had the inspiration of certain real life people like Mr. Darby and the Brethren that I could use for my research. Then, since I'm an archivist, I've always have been immersed in primary sources, and the research that I've done, general historical research, means that I know where to look to find, say, newspaper archives or scans of 19th century books and so on. So from that point of view, it wasn't, at least I knew where to start, and I had good experience in it, so I didn't find it tedious or hard work from that point of view. But I think anyone writing historical fiction will always be constantly fact-checking to make sure that what they're writing down is correct. The last thing you want to do is to have anachronisms and things that are not in the right time and things that are incorrect, because some reader will point it out to you and it'll be embarrassing. So that can be tedious when you're writing a scene and you're kind of in the scene and you're enjoying it, and then you just come across a little fact and saying, is this right? Is this in the wrong time, or something along those lines? And then it's off to Wikipedia to check, or something somewhere else, just to make sure you're getting it right. But in terms of depicting Dublin itself, I really enjoyed that part of it. Because of this research for Fitzwilliam Square, I felt very at home in 19th century Dublin, and I loved the fact that I could set the book in Rutland Square, which is now called Parnell Square in Dublin, on the north side of the river, which, if you know Dublin, is not a very salubrious side or wealthy side anymore. It's kind of gone into disrepair of it, whereas the south of the river is much more stylish and fashionable. So it was nice to be able to show the north side of the city when it was in its heyday and when it was still fashionable and wealthy. And then I just liked naming the streets and naming the landmarks of the particular buildings. And I like the fact that a person who knows Dublin will be able to follow the action through the streets and squares, and it would provide them with an added enjoyment just to know where the action is, be able to recognize it. Because it's something that I like when I read historical fiction set in Dublin. I like the fact that there's kind of an uncanny feeling of knowing what a certain location looks like, and you can just place yourself there much easier. I wonder about it in terms of people who aren't from Dublin or who don't know Dublin, how it feels. Is there any sense then of what the city looks like? How much of it is just imagination? I suppose if you don't know Dublin, it's all imagination. And whereas if you're familiar with Dublin, you can have this very kind of visceral sense of knowing where the action is and you get to plot your way to certain locations. So I suppose it's interesting to get this Polish perspective, since I'm sure most readers wouldn't know what Dublin looks like. And I suppose that's why the map helped, having the map at the start of the book.
But you cut my street out. Lombard Street was supposed to be in it.
It's supposed to be in it.
Well, it wasn't. That's the street where I was born, and it's, you know.
All right.
So you take us as far as Camden Street, and it's going up to Haysbury Street, and then suddenly it's cut. You know.
Yeah. Nothing interesting ever happened on Lombard Street. That's
nothing. Only Leopold Bloom and Molly Bloom lived there, but aside from that, nothing else, right?
Well, you know, I suppose it was taken then. Joyce had taken it, so I had to use something else. But I wondered if Polish
you've accidentally
readers,
insulted James Joyce at your own book launch. Yeah, it's really.
I wondered, did Polish readers make use of the map at the start of the book? Was it something that
it's a brilliant map? It's a brilliant map. I'm only having fun with you. It's an absolutely brilliant map.
Yeah. I hope it was a help.
What did you think of it all? Yeah,
it was easier to picture all the different places where she went, and then how she moved around the city. It was very helpful.
Oh, that's good.
Well, we have somebody actually holding the book in her hands, looking at the map, and I think we're going to tilt the laptop to my left, and Barbara, over to you.
All right. Hello. I would just very much like to read a fragment. It's on the page 316, just near the end. I really enjoyed the fragment. It's the final confrontation between Professor Reeves and Abigail. I really liked it because, as you said, Abigail is very much a believer of the rationalist approach, and she is, well, betrayed by someone who represents that approach, right? And me personally, I did not expect Professor Reeves to be the villain at all. So this was a very shocking moment, and I would very much like to read it. You are wicked. Your reasoning has made you callous and deceitful. You are worse than any Brethren member, certainly more dangerous. Did you really expect me to remain silent about what you have done? Whatever happens here, you will be found out. You will be captured and punished. It would have been better for you to leave me on the road, for I will not help you now. The professor stood still as he listened. He didn't sigh or twitch his hands. When I was finished, he began to nod.
Do you know the most important difference between men and women of science, Miss Lawless, and men and women of faith?
He raised the pistol and leveled it at my head.
A man of science can admit when he has blundered.
I crouched down and threw the candle. The flame dragged and guttered in the air, and Reeves used his pistol to bat it against the wall. The candle was extinguished, except for the red glow of the wick, and the room was plunged into darkness. Reeves didn't fire, and I was reluctant to barge past, for he couldn't fail to hit me at such close quarters. I could not discern his outline, and since he had been watching me hold the candle, I hoped his vision was even worse. There was no sound of footsteps. He was not marching through the room to seek me out, so I stayed perfectly still, afraid that any noise might draw his fire. A pillow jutted over the edge of the bed. I picked it up and tossed it against the opposite wall. It landed and tumbled with soft thuds, but Reeves did not react.
Do you think that you have left the world a better place than you found it, Miss Lawless? In the end, is that all one can hope for?
His voice had not come from where I expected. It seemed closer to the door, as if he planned to cut off any escape.
Do you remember when we spoke of the age of the earth? Those eons of time that existed before you were born? You are certain they were real, aren't you? Even though you have no sense of them, no memory or experience.
I heard the floorboards creak and I slid towards the bottom of the bed.
What is there to fear then, if that oblivion is all that awaits you?
I felt beneath the bed for anything. A slat of wood, even a chamber cot.
I can see the outline of the window and the corner of the bed, but do not worry about the darkness, Abigail. I cannot miss from here.
The muzzle flash lit the room for a quarter second, and a pale image hung in the blackness like the projection of a camera obscura. Professor was closer than I imagined. He loomed above me with his elbow bent and his eyes scrunched shut, the gun pointed at his own temple. I covered my face and turned my head, but still saw his white grimace against my eyelids. The sound of the gunshot was followed by his collapse and the clatter of the pistol on the floorboards. Hey, thank you
Oh.
very much for this.
Barbara.
That was beautiful.
That was beautiful. And just the wondrousness of your prose resonates when Barbara reads and you help her, Miss Professor Reeves.
No, that was wonderful. I really appreciate that. It was Barbara's idea. It was Barbara's idea for me to join in as Professor Reeves, and I appreciate that. It was excellent. No, it was wonderful to hear, and you read it so brilliantly as well. So thank you.
Wonderful stuff.
Thank you.
So we're going to be kind of coming towards an end. I think there are two more questions, and then I'd like to ask one or two questions, just maybe before the questions, actually. What does the future hold for you now, Andrew, in terms of, I mean, you've had this wonderful success with this book. You're a marvelous writer, so it's onwards and upwards, clearly. So what does the future hold for you?
I've just finished a modern crime book, my first modern novel, again set in Dublin. The main character is an archivist like me. He lives on the same street that I do, but that's where the similarities end, especially when the murders begin. So that modern book is just finished. I have an agent in Northern Ireland who at the moment is trying to find a publisher, so fingers crossed.
Fantastic.
And because of the boost that One Dublin One Book has given me and given the character of Abigail, I've begun to write a sequel to The Coroner's Daughter. So Abigail will return in a future book. It is.
It's just that you can see that these characters aren't finished. That they've got the arc of their story has yet to play out. Yes. I think her father is a very interesting character. I'm sure you have plans for him in the next.
I do. There are plans for them all, and Clarissa will play a bigger part. It's her friend Clarissa will be there. I'm still undecided whether Ewan should return in the sequel. People over here are very insistent that Ewan come back. I think perhaps Abigail should go.
Can I just tilt this backwards? Here, back over left. When you said that, the reaction was yes.
Oh. How is that?
Andrew, you cannot take the romance or the potential, the possibility of romance away from us, you know.
But there's always, there's more fish in the sea. And anyway,
okay.
And there's only so much bubbling tension that you can keep going before people go, well, it's time, something else has to happen. Anyway, so leave that with me. It's early on in the plot, so there's plenty of time for you.
Okay, well, you have an actor, you have people you can consult with as you write, yes? And when you're doing the map, you can stick Lombard Street on the map as well, yeah? So we just, sorry, can't resist, sorry. And so we have we have a couple, so all I want to is just read out a few quick fire questions for you.
We have a question from the chat from actually one of our students, Maria Czekawa. Abigail seemed to be as very mature for her age. Did you intended to make her this way? What was your inspiration in depicting an 18-year-old girl?
Good question.
Mm-hmm. Yes, she's quite mature. I suppose that could come back to the question of not having a mother and, her mother being passed away. Where she kind of just has to learn to fend for herself a bit more. And I think that might be something that occurs when people in general lose a parent at a young age. They have to mature quicker than other children would have to do. It was just as well to show her, it's kind of a sign of her intelligence, perhaps, that she is mature for her age. And choosing her age as 18, there was nothing particularly about it. It was just kind of a point in a person's life where they're leaving a certain type of era behind and moving into adulthood. I don't know if that was the case in 1816, but in our society,
I think a lot of young people relate to the fact that she's a young person making her mark. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Any other questions?
Yes.
Just a quick fire for you, Andrew. Yeah. So.
Sure.
Question from Katarzyna Kociołek. Thank you, Andrew, for this amazing book. How easy or difficult was it for you to narrate the story as a young woman?
I think I didn't think about it too much. I think I just went for it. I think generally when you're narrating, whether it's from a woman's point of view or a man's point of view, and just kind of deciding how would a person, whoever your character is, react in a situation, a lot of the time you can trust your own instinct as to how a person would react if you just really put yourself in this position and imagine it completely. how would I react to the restraints that are placed on Abigail, to the slights that she perceives, and whatever it might be. So I think a lot of the time, if you're very kind of open and honest about what you're writing, your first instinct will be correct. Obviously, then you have to analyze it and make sure that it is right, and be open to suggestions if a reader feels that perhaps you're not capturing the voice of a young woman correctly, or it's not how somebody thinks. So mostly it was a case of instinct, and mostly I didn't think too deeply about it when I was writing it, but I was very open to analyzing it after.
I think it fits perfectly with the theme of women in Dublin in 19th century. I think that the narration as a first person from a female perspective is just perfect.
Oh, thank you.
Wonderful. So is that
Yeah, I think
that's it. Barbara, would you like to finish with a few words to Andrew?
Well, I just want to say that I hope if this book ever gets a movie adaptation, you should definitely play the villain, right?
All right, I can be Professor Reed, no problem.
Yes, well, just thank you very much on behalf of everyone, right?
Yes, yes. Well, the team here. Yes, come over here. Barbara. Come with the three. We'd just like to thank everyone for taking part, for everyone for fielding questions. Andrew, we're just so excited for you. I think we're just delighted to know you now, and you know, and keep in touch and let us know how everything progresses. And I think everything's progressing wonderfully for you. And we hope to have you soon over in Warsaw and in Poland. We'll do a book tour, or for the next book, for this book, and everything else in the future.
No, absolutely. I really appreciate that you hosted this. I really appreciate everybody for reading the book and their questions. It's been a thrill to be able to explore it like this. So, and if I play Professor Reeves, I think Barbara will have to be playing Abigail in the future.
I was going to suggest that, but you got in there first. Well done, and it's great that you said it. I agree. And so Ola, I think we just want to thank also the embassy. Thank you very much for hosting us. Thank you, Dominic. That was wonderful. And I think we'd like Jackie Lynham to say a few words, who's from the One Dublin One Book initiative. Jackie, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Thanks, everyone. That was just really wonderful. So thank you so much, Barry and Ola and Barbara and Andrew and everybody for all the questions. They were so insightful and considered questions, and everybody has read the book really, attentively. So it was really interesting to sit back and listen to that. And you obviously put a lot of work into today's event. So thank you, all of you. We are just so delighted to have the Irish Embassy in Warsaw take part in this initiative. One Dublin One Book has been running since 2006, so it's going a long time. And the whole idea behind it is to get people reading the book. It started initially with just getting people in Dublin reading the book, but now it's expanded to people anywhere and everywhere reading the book, which is brilliant. And I think the great thing for us was during the pandemic, we were able to expand the program online and bring in an international audience. So that's been one of the real benefits. There were lots of downsides, obviously, to us. We had to cancel a lot of our events in 2020. But the upside of that was that we went online. So now we can host events like this and bring in readers from Poland and hear all your comments. And that's just such a really wonderful thing for us. So we really appreciate it. And just on the online activities, if you go to the One Dublin One Book.ie website, we are putting up some of the events that we have recorded in Dublin this month. So we have recorded a few events. There was one with the state pathologists that happened in the Royal Irish Academy. We had one with a meteorologist last week in the Botanic Gardens in Dublin. And then we had a very special sort of gala event in the Hugh Lane Gallery, which is actually features in The Coroner's Daughter. And that was a night of music with the Dublin String Quartet and Andrew in conversation with Niall McMonigal. And we had two actors reading. Not as good as the acting today now, I have to say, but
Yeah,
they did their best. They did their best. So we will put all them up online on the website. So, if you've all read the book so closely that you might be interested in watching some more events, and do check it out. But just to say a huge thank you to everyone at the Irish Embassy in Warsaw and to all the students who read the book and came along today. It really is heartwarming to see such a positive reaction to the book, and thank you so much.
Thanks, Jackie.
Thanks, Jackie. Wonderful words. And I think we can close there.
Oh, sorry,
Andrew.
can I just say,
Yes.
Barry, I will be walking down Lombard Street tomorrow, so I'll have a little pilgrimage for you on my way to the office, okay?
Just take a little nod at number 5.
Number 5, I'm writing it
Number
down.
5.
Will I throw some petals at the
house,
door
great
for you?
street. Yes, we still know some of the neighbours, so.
It's a great spot. I cross over the bridge from Connolly Station and walk up that way on my way to work in Pearse Street Library, so.
Gorgeous, wonderful stuff. Great. It's actually Lombard Street West off the South Circular Road.
Oh, South Side,
There are
sorry, I was
two-
thinking
actually,
east.
this is the thing. There are actually 2. I think Andrew actually put the wrong Lombard Street in the map. He but he didn't put Lombard Street West. So that's
Oh, it's the west. Well, I'll have to make a pilgrimage over to Kate.
I have to say there was actually so I was born in Lombard Street 5, and there was actually a studio in the other Lombard Street 5. So very often we'd have like Cadillacs knocking, coming up to our door, knocking, saying, "Where's the studio?" You know. So the studio used to send us flowers every couple of months just as an apology. But of course, we loved the distraction. You know what I mean? So it was good. You know. So listen, thank you everyone for this absolutely wonderful, wonderful event. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Dominic, and everyone at the embassy. And I just like personally to thank Basha and Ola for just being wonderful co-hosts. So. Thank you very much. Well done to you too.
Well done.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye.